Hey Channel Insiders, I'm your host Katie Bavoso, and welcome back to part 2 of my interview with CEO of 3rdmill, Natalia Scheidegger. If you haven't watched or listened to part 1, you know what to do. Head on over to channelinsider.com right now to catch up. In this half of the interview, Natalia explains what she wishes she did sooner as an MSP leader and how she went from knowing nothing about tech to more than doubling the size of 3rdmill. I do have to ask, your experience working at Deloitte prior to this, did that set you up at all for how you wanted to come in? I love that you talk about asking questions and just going ahead and asking them, because I do find that ego sometimes steps in the way in the industry that we're in, and people are afraid to ask what they call silly questions, quoting for people listening on the podcast version. But for you, was there anything from your previous career experience that sort of drove you in that direction and set you up for the way that you lead?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I've been reflecting on that a little bit lately. And so I was in the strategy team at Deloitte, and they train you on that kind of first principles problem solving I was mentioning about, like they call hypothesis driven strategy. And I think there's a lot of debate now about how to approach strategy and like the design thinking style, but I think there's still something in the way that they train you to be naturally curious and ask questions. And they talked about it as boiling the ocean and boiling it again to kind of really get to the answer. And so I kind of developed what I guess is a strategic way of problem solving, which comes down to kind of those first principles and then kind of scratching and then kind of getting the data to back up that hypothesis. Whereas I think engineers sometimes just troubleshoot and follow steps without necessarily kind of understanding the bigger picture about what might be happening. I've always been big picture and then sought the details to kind of support the big picture, and it's a different mindset. So I definitely do think that the lessons that I learned at Deloitte were different to what most other MSP owners, certainly at the time, a skill set had, like what they had. And I definitely brought that to bear early on. I remember like the first few months sitting in my father's chair, that was the skill set I had. And so, I ran what I can only describe as strategic workshops with the management team and sort of tried to tease out from them, well, what are the challenges you're facing? What do you think the company should be doing? Questions that I think as owners, we don't ask very often, but that was the only tool I had. And it's funny that we kind of, through that, built out a couple of strategic pillars of things that we wanted to do. And I remember looking back 3 or 4 years later and went, oh, we did all those. And it was kind of this accidental strategy. And actually one of those pillars was the software product, Lucinda, that was then born and grew and now has its own legs. And it kind of came from those early strategic workshop sessions, asking those questions, the curiosity, right? Why? And wanting to really understand and scratch at it. So yes, I think it has helped.
Now, when we first spoke a little bit about your journey, you had mentioned in the beginning, and you've mentioned it on this recording, in the beginning you were like, what exactly am I doing here? Like, which way do I go? Who do I speak to? What do I want to do with 3rdmill? When you started to travel and go to those industry events and really get your hands into the community, was there any sort of particular person, or you did mention that entrepreneurial group that you were encouraged to belong to. Was that the starting point, or was there an event that you decided to go to as the first one and that sort of triggered your networking abilities after that?
Probably about 5-6 years into kind of the 10-year journey that I started the entrepreneurial group, EO, and that certainly helped to grow me as a leader and a person. But I missed a trick on the industry front. I still wasn't networking in the industry. I didn't know a single other MSP owner. And it wasn't until 7 years in, I think I went to a ConnectWise event. And I remember turning to one of the ConnectWise account managers and I think he sensed the just intense, authentic vulnerability in me when I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know a single other MSP owner. How is everyone else doing this? And he looked at me and he went, do you want to connect with other MSP owners? There's lots of communities that do that. Let me introduce you to one. And so I got involved through like the ConnectWise peer groups. And so that was actually the first thing, was this ConnectWise account manager who I'd never met before, I think sensing the desperate vulnerability in me, who then introduced me. And so I started going along. And so that was the start of it, was these peer groups, which I know the industry is rife for. ConnectWise is just one of them, but there are many out there. And I started to network and it just set my business on fire. It was a complete 180. I suddenly started being in rooms with other people who were solving all the same problems I'd been solving for 7 years, and they were doing it at a much faster rate and innovating at a much faster rate. If there's one regret I have, it's that I didn't clock on how critical the networking piece was in the industry to growing your business. Like, you just cannot grow these things in isolation. The technology is moving too fast, the industry is moving too fast, the customers are moving too fast. And unless you're colluding in the background, which is quite blatantly what we do, there's just no way. And there's this kind of sense of the rising tide lifts all boats, because we make each other better, and that lifts the industry and the perception of MSPs from customers as well. So I think there are, and I think we intellectually understand the advantages of it, but I just didn't realize how rife it was and how critical it was. And since that initial peer group introduction, I have now been to many other industry conferences with many other vendors, met an incredible wealth of people, and my numbers track. The growth has tracked to that journey. It's almost like it's a one-to-one correlation. So yeah, it was, I kicked myself I didn't do it sooner, but it has been huge. And there are certainly a handful of individuals I've met through those networks who have been the game changers for me.
You guys know who you are. Just saying.
Yes.
It's interesting how your perspective can change from competition to community, and really see those people around you as excelling your business and not trying to hold you back. And I love that story. I love the vulnerability underlying everything here, because it's gotten you this far. It's gotten you this far to be able to ask for help, to ask the questions that nobody else is asking because they might be nervous. And with that in mind, knowing that there are going to be people who are just starting out watching or listening to this interview, is there anything that you would tell them to do immediately, whether it be go to this event, join this peer group, reach out to this person, ask that question, anything that you would tell them actionably that they can get on top of right now to change and accelerate their growth?
I mean, the vulnerability piece is really part of it, right? Like, I mean, you say that, yeah, that's what I did, but it took me too long. And so I think the piece of advice is, this isn't a shameless plug at all, ask your vendors. Just sit down with your vendors and honestly say to them, I don't know what I'm doing. Help me out, and just see what they say. And most of the time, they'll reach into their back pocket, and through their networks, even the vendor itself, will have a program. Peer groups is definitely the one that needs to get like bubbled to the top, because it's such an obvious one, and it's so clearly a good model that most vendors will have a version of a peer group. Personally, I'm part of the ConnectWise Evolve community, but I now know other MSPs in other ways through other vendor relationships who are equally as strong in my network. So I think the vendor piece is big. And then through that, go to the conferences, go to the networking days, even if you are introverted and hate it and hate small talk, which I know is odd, but is me. Like, I didn't like the small talk thing. Practice the muscle, and you'll get out there, and it'll become easier and easier and easier until suddenly you're actually just going to these conferences and hanging out with your friends. And that's easy.
I love that. And I think that's so important to talk about. And it's true. I can tell you, you start going to these events and you see more and more familiar faces, and you're like, wait a minute, we're friends, aren't we? We do this now, and you help me. So it's such a great feeling. And I'm so excited that you got to experience that and can encourage others now to do it faster than those first 7 years. So really wonderful to hear.
Hopefully someone out there can do it faster than I did, because my goodness, too slow.
I'd love to be able to talk more about 3rdmill and your progress and just the success that you've experienced in that time that you've really fought hard to make happen. Is there a success story with a particular client that you can speak to, even if you can't say the client's name because financial services, obviously, but is there one that you might be able to point to kind of walk me through how you were able to be a differentiator for their business and help drive success for them?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's lots of little stories, but I think the biggest stories are certainly where we've sort of come in with the client and they've had very little to do with technology, or technology has always just been sort of this sort of noise in the background, right? And we've sort of come in and totally transformed. And so one of the things we do is cloud transformations is a big one. So there's one customer we inherited many years ago that had, on-prem servers, everything was there. They were being serviced by a one-man band, and like technology was just noise for them, right? Like it worked or it didn't. And, we kind of set the vision and the strategy of where they needed to be. The file, the SharePoint migrations, the getting rid of the server, the Microsoft Intune, getting rid of the domain controller. And then we got close to working with them, and then actually the conversation evolved through to, well, actually, can you help us with our workflow system too? Because we're actually struggling a little bit with some internal processes, and we worked with them to build out that. And like, we transformed that business, and I know we did. And that journey is a blueprint that we've repeated in many other customers, where it's not just that we came in and we put in our cookie cutter technical solution and then charge a monthly service case, thanks for playing. We come in and we've transformed the business, not just from a solution tech perspective, but in how they work. SharePoint training sessions have been a big one. When we work with customers to build SharePoint, we train their team, and we actually architect out the intranet and the SharePoint sites in a way that works for them. There's one customer who's going on the Copilot journey, and they've bought Copilot licenses for all their staff. So we've got a Copilot training session with them in a couple of weeks where, we're bringing a vendor to bear to help run that session to uplift their capability, because, they bought the licenses and we're struggling to kind of get the maximum use out of it. So it's kind of lots of little things, but for me, it's always been about the customer first lens in the solution and technology second. So what does the customer want? What are the pain points that they have? And then what is the right technical solution stack to bring that to life? So recently we kind of redid our business mission statement, and now it is very much about radically transforming, I think, 500 businesses with technology is the mission statement, the 10-year big hairy goals. And I think we're there. I think we're on the journey there. I think we've already knocked a couple of pegs off that 500 just from the way that we approach technology and problem solving with them.
Speaking of approaching problem solving with technology, how are you implementing some new trends like AI or anything else that you're following that maybe I'm not even bringing up right now? How are you implementing new trends for your customers into your business, into their business to, again, drive success there?
Yeah, lots of little things that we've been doing. One of my favorite ones is certainly pre-AI, which I'll talk to in a second. But the Power Platform and automate flows and things like that. And just kind of, we did a couple of consulting engagements with customers where we sort of helped them build out some really, really, really innovative flows to help with contracts or support ticket requests and things like that, and just automate something that was a pain point in their business, which they already had the tools to solve for. They just didn't know how to put it all together. And so, something as simple as working with a customer on a flow, Power Automate flow, you'd be surprised at how much value that brings to them. But on the AI side, that's been a really, really good journey. So I sort of see the AI journey as kind of two-paced. There's this sort of general uplift in productivity that comes from AI, and that's really primarily in the Microsoft space driven by Copilot. And so that journey there has been around kind of, as soon as the announcement came out, we could buy the license. I was like, gimme. I would have bought a couple of licenses and have started to use that internally in the team and trying to upskill my team on that, and then take that to customers and then have them start to pick out AI champions within their business, give them a Copilot license and have them experiment as well to try and get that 10% productivity uplift, 10 sometimes more percent that you can get from just having your Copilot help you with your day. And so obviously that Copilot training session with that customer in a couple of weeks is just the next step on that journey of Copilot uplift. And I see that as just giving you that little kicker from a productivity perspective. But it's not the game-changing AI. It's just at the margins. And I think a lot of customers are struggling a little bit with that because they're sort of like, well, hang on, we should be doing more. And I think that's where the other part of AI is coming in, which is the specific use case. And that needs to come from the problem first, solution second, not just we'll use some AI and see how it goes, but what is a pain point that you have around large areas of documentation, finding information, whatever the case might be, and how can we leverage Azure OpenAI in this instance to plug into that data and create a tool, a chat, or automate a process that is labor intensive using some of the generative AI tools that are now available. And that's a longer journey. Internally, we've started to experiment that with pointing Azure OpenAI at some of our kind of ticketing systems to try and get knowledge base information out. And that's still very, very early proof of concept phases. And we are by no means experts in that. But then similarly, looking at pointing that same technology at kind of the data sets we have like in Lucinda in our SaaS product to try and kind of give brokers an edge around how they can access and mine their information as well, which once again, is still in early proof of concept phases. But my kind of call out at the moment to customers has been, well, let's talk about use cases. Like, let's work together and get a proof of concept together, because that's the only way we're going to start to kind of see and drive traction in this space. And so we're already starting to have those conversations. But what's interesting is that those conversations are less about the technology. It's an AI strategy conversation. What are the problems you're trying to solve? What are the different use cases? What are the ROI and effort of those use cases? Prioritize them, put them on a matrix, pluck one out and go for that. And that's a very intrinsically strategic conversation that I guess I'm, from my Deloitte days, reasonably well trained at, but isn't necessarily something the MSP community naturally has as a skill set. And so I think the journey around AI for us as an industry is going to be, how do we flex that consulting muscle more to tease out these use cases from our customers and help them deliver on them? And I'm not sure there's a solution or that I have yet, but I think that's the problem. And I'm interested to see how we solve it.
I think the word editing comes to mind, because you think about, we have this great new technology, but what are we going to use it for? Do we really want to spend the money and the time just throwing it around and seeing what it might stick to? Or should we come up with the actual problem we want to solve and see if this is the tool that it would work for? I think presenting solutions is only so great if there's actually a problem that it can solve, instead of just being cool.
The first few months of the AI wave was very much us just throwing AI at problems, seeing what stuck, right? We ran an AI event recently, and I talked about the kind of the trough of despair in the Gartner trend wave. You know, it, like every time trends happen, there's this huge peak, and then there's this trough of disillusionment. And that I sort of talked about at this event, actually, this idea that we're sort of hurtling down the trough a little bit in some cases, because everyone's sort of going, well, like AI's not really changed my job yet.
Right. And
so there's this sort of sense of like, well, what's going to happen? And a little bit of fear, I guess, as well. What is going to happen? Like, is it going to take jobs and things? And I think that the answer here is to flip the conversation and actually start to look at problems and then experiment with AI solving them, rather than just saying, I need to use AI. Throw it at it and see what sticks. So, and I think that's what's going to get us over the AI hangover a little bit.
So earlier we were talking a little bit about vendors. We've obviously talked about ConnectWise and Microsoft. But are there any other vendors, whether they be bigger, smaller, distributors, anybody in the tech partner field that you're working with right now that has just done really right by you and you're enjoying working with, and they're adding to your tech stack in a really exponential way?
Yeah, I mean, it goes without saying that kind of think Pax8 is on that list. We obviously met at the Pax8 conference in Denver, and they have really been instrumental to us around kind of opening up a huge number of opportunities and connecting us with vendors and the conferences and enabling us with that AI event. That was actually something that Pax8 kind of came to us and sort of said, hey, do you want to do something like this? That's been an incredible journey. So yeah, I definitely think to all MSPs out there, tap into your distributors. Like that relationship is so key. Obviously, we're with Pax8, but you can build the relationship, and it's really what you get out of it. Mm-hmm. What you get out of it is really what you put into it. And dedicating that time, again, going to those conferences, going to those events that sometimes the vendors are hounding you to go to, there is actually value there. So I think Pax8's the main one. Certainly the ConnectWise community. You know, we also work a lot with Enable, and there's probably the primary ones we use. But I'm always open and love talking to vendors, and a lot of great relationships with vendors themselves who I now consider friends as well, not just other MSP owners. And sometimes I even tap into them and word vomit my business problems, because they're often very insightful in their perspective around how to solve it, because they see things at a cross-section across several MSPs. So to this day, I still talk to many vendors, even in that sense as well, and give them and use them as mentors and guides.
No small talk anymore, just word vomiting business problems and saying, how do you help me solve this?
Well, I already told you I hate small talk, right?
How was the weather today? I need you to solve this issue for me, please.
Which I'm pretty sure I've started a conversation not dissimilar to that.
Well, my last question for you today, Natalia, would just be, how can we get in touch with you, get in touch with 3rd Mill if we're in Australia and anywhere that you service, to seek out your services as an end user?
We're based in Australia. Sydney, Melbourne are our homes. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's the best place to grab me, or jump on our website. I'd love to have a chat, regardless of industry, even if you're another MSP owner, because always up for a coffee and a chat, as long as you bring your vulnerability and your business problems with you.
No small talk, just vulnerability and business problems and coffee. It's truly been a pleasure getting to catch up with you and speak with you again, Natalia. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your 2024.
Thanks, Katie. You too.
Thanks again to Natalia for joining me today, and thank you for watching or listening. You can check out all episodes of Channel Insider Partner POV on channelinsider.com or watch on our YouTube page at channelinsider_news and trends. You can also listen to the podcast version of every episode on your favorite podcast listening platform. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow wherever possible so you never miss an episode. Once again, I'm Katie Bavoso, and I'll see you next time.